Right, hello. This is episode 18 of the Sisyphus complex solution. With one thing and another, and that I've not really had the opportunity to think of a title for this week's show yet, so well know what it is when it gets actually put up online. Fair few things to get through again this week. I don't know if it's going to be another long one. I have had a comment to suggest that I'd be better off making things a little bit shorter, but I think I probably have explained this before, but in order for people to actually understand the depth of the process, I think it is worthy taking the time that I do and going into the level of detail that I do, because it's one thing to turn around and just outlay what the actual process steps should be and then show you like this miraculous end result. Just to, so it gives you like a 5-minute overview, but you're not really going to understand the depths of things on that in that sort of method. So I'd rather do things in the fashion that I am. At least it makes it original, if not exceptionally boring for a lot of people. But this is the scenario when you're talking about looking towards having something put in place where it would be the basis of running an entire country. I mean, anybody that could tell you that, okay, we've got this little 10-point plan that we're now going to put in front of you and say, yes, that is going to be the basis of running the country. I'm sorry, but that would be bullshit. It's not going to work. So as much as this might end up being quite long, drawn out, and yes, on occasion quite boring, it still helps, as far as I'm concerned, to the massive hordes of, 37 people subscribed to this. It helps a little bit in terms of being able to get some more detail. So I'm going to stick with it. I mean, who knows? At episode 2000, I might have something that people will then want to tune into and go, oh look, he's done all that work already, and that seemed like that was easy enough to do, forgetting about all the couple of thousand episodes before that, but never mind. So yes, I am going to continue in the vein that I am doing. Certain things might change to a certain degree as I'm going forward, but I'm just going to play everything by ear. But I do want to make sure that I go through every single department, every single part of the process as best I can. Give the explanations in the way that I can, give the suggestions in the way that I can, leaving the floor open for anybody else to say yay, nay, any alternatives. So with that being said, let's get on with it. There is a particular piece of information that I've seen this week, and I think has been going around doing the circuit, especially in the UK, a few places externally as well. It does appear that some people have actually discovered what journalism is again, and I know they like to do it in this form of the kind of catch people out type of scenario, and again it becomes a bit of an outrage story, but it's still the same principle. It is the fact that somebody is actually, I think this is from the Daily Mail, where they did actually bother to take the time to get in touch with the National Audit Office and say, well, what contracts have been issued since all of the Ponzi China virus Great Reset appeasement plan started. Quite plainly, it has been make a fair few bob for your mates scenario, and even when faced with it publicly, and that old Boris the Appeaser still won't turn around and sort of hold his hands up and go, yeah, caught me, or anything like that. I mean, the thing about this is that yes, it is good for people to understand the extent of this, what can only essentially be called crony capitalism. It is the benefit for people to understand how you can look into these things for yourself. I mean, this is essentially in that sort of touching a little bit on the area that I'm doing on a much wider scale. Like I said, I mean, if you remember when I was going into the Projects Authority and things of this nature, it's quite surprising what you can find out when you do actually bother to look. It's one thing to identify where the problems are, But then it's another thing to actually understand where those problems can be resolved. So in terms of a wider process and how things can be set out to be able to raise flags against this kind of thing happening in the future. But it does very plainly let everybody know that, once again, it doesn't matter which one of the established parties it is in this country, none of them can be trusted. Come next May, when the local elections start, we have to start going independent, whether that's, like I said, within those, as I've said previously rather, within those three new parties of Reclaim, Reform or Heritage Party, or if you just want to stand as an independent or anything along those lines, as long as you're not supporting some raving lunatic communist, socialist, whatever. But yeah, I mean, this kind of thing to me, and that is, it's an indication that the days are starting to come when people are looking into the information that they should be looking into once again, and starting to hold people to account a bit. Obviously, this has been splashed out on the papers, and literally bugger all is going to be done about it. That much is for certain. But the more that people understand this type of thing, and as I say, as I'm going through my process as well, the more that you start to see these things going on, the more you start to explore it yourself, you may find that there are certain areas that are of interest to you, that you want to say, right, okay, perhaps there's something to do with a particular part of the NHS, for example, which, as far as I've heard today, and that apparently they're going to be getting the pay rise above everybody else, despite the fact that they don't actually do anything anymore. If there are certain areas like that that you want to actually bother to look into and investigate to certain degrees, which would probably be something that I'd have to do later on, and I do to a level, I'll say, in terms of sending out freedom of information requests, so we can really start to put together a real picture as to what the real problems are and essentially who the problem lays with as well. So I mean, it's a matter of a solution of process, and then a solution in terms of selection. So make sure you got the process in place, which is what I hope to be able to put together, so that you'll be able to have things with an awful lot more of the actual transparency that we're looking for, and then have a process in place, or a selection process in place where you understand the type of individual that you should be electing to office, and it clearly isn't any of these appeasers. So yes, good to see journalists actually being journalists again, though it'd be nice to see them digging in a little bit further and having people, I mean, it probably would be more along the lines of think tank basis and that, in terms of doing the sorts of digging that I do as well. But you know, it's fine. This is all a good sign, and there is another piece that I'll allude to later on that again is showing the signs that people are actually learning how to put together information again, looking into things, understanding things, knowing where, essentially identifying the enemy that has made themselves known. This type of scenario. So yeah, if this is going to start to take place, let's hope it keeps going. Let's hope that ball keeps rolling. The more people get to understand these things, the more they know, the better off we'll be. So I thought I'd highlight this particular thing. As per usual, links in the description. So let's move into the part that I do. Right, so the first department this week, or as we've come to understand it, they're all basically independent corporations. So you've got the Competition Appeal Tribunal. I'm not going to read through the things that they do in that, but I mean, there's the their statements in terms of what it is that they think that they do. Obviously the department itself and that is not coming in at a great amount of cost to the taxpayer. However, there are a couple of issues that I've got with this particular one, in terms of the fact that the stated body within the government website itself, and then which links through to the Competition Appeal Tribunal, it's actually called the Competition Service. So you have something that is registered as the Competition Service, but it's operating as the Competition Appeal Tribunal. Can you have a different operating name to your registered name? Yes, of course you can. However, I'm not entirely sure that that's a wise thing within government. So I've got a bit of an issue. It's a minor issue, yes, but it's an issue nonetheless, and that I don't think these sorts of bodies and that should be operating under different names. Because essentially, this, the Competition Service is the officially registered body, and it funds what is the operating arm of it. So, I just think it's jargon that they don't need to be messing around with. It is also delinquent by 1 year in terms of its reporting. So from a corporate perspective again, if this is the type of standard that they want to be holding people to, and if we do want to be able to have this effective level of legislative law rather than common law, in terms of who's a corporation, who isn't, and that, and whether you're an individual and that and so forth, if people are going to be held to certain standards, then they have to be held to those standards as well. So this department is delinquent. It was specifically put together as a result of essentially, this is one of the parts that I don't like about the way that government operates, is that they developed the Enterprise Act of 2002 and then created this specifically for that function. If you're making a law and then having to create a corporation off the back of it, then something's wrong there, especially considering one that is based on appeals. If you remember previously in that, I'd covered the Competition Markets Authority. A great deal of the cases that they handle through this appeal tribunal are basically what has gone through the Competition Markets Authority. They didn't like the result, so they come here. And it's, to me, this smacks of this layer on layer of obfuscation, complication, additional taxpayer cost, all this faffing around in terms of something that's, if you've had a decision made in a particular court, and again, so this goes into the alterations to the wider legal system, and particularly the courts, in terms of you seem to have various different courts for various different routes of recourse, essentially. Obviously in that we can all pretty much understand the difference between civil and criminal, and then you've got magistrates and blah blah. But when it comes down to things around the commercial sector in particular, if you've gone through the legal process, you've had the fight. The law should be stipulated in such a fashion that it's fairly clear as to what it should be. Like I say, so that's part one of where the reforms are going to be required, and that because too much of this being left open to question, and that's why you end up having this additional precedent, additional law, additional this and additional that, which is essentially just a bunch of bureaucrats and technocrats giving themselves something to do to make themselves look important. Get the bloody thing done straight and correct in the first place. If there are any specific anomalies, it shouldn't take an entire system to be shoved onto the side of it to be able to cure a small anomaly. Now, if you've gone through that legal system, and if say for example you've lost, but you understand that for whatever reason, because this is another part of it that I'll come into in a second, for whatever reason the judgment has gone against you, if you can prove that something has not been read correctly, something has been I forget what the terms are for this sort of stuff, but so for example it's been annulled, it's been put to one side as not being relevant, yet it actually is. If you've come up with additional evidence after the fact, that becomes a little bit difficult now, because it is your obligation to be able to get things in on time, unless you've got a very distinct reason as to why that hasn't come in on time. But I don't really see any reason why we can't where required, and if it meets the appropriate criteria, hold the process again in the same court. I don't see why we have to keep going through this layer and then up to another layer and then up to another layer, and everything just becoming more and more expensive. I don't see the purpose in that. To me, it just sounds like it's set up to be a scam. So within that, and where we do find a bit of a problem, which something that I alluded to in terms of whether something has not been interpreted correctly or not, this is where we have to look towards the judiciary themselves in terms of what their activities are, what their background is, what their any sort of ideological bent that they've got. You have to be able to weed out those people that are not going to be acting as truly independently minded and objective judges of any particular case or scenario. So I think it's become quite clear, particularly over recent years, and all the way up to the Supreme Court level in the UK, where judges are so clearly biased in whatever particular direction it's been in. So these types of areas as well, it appeals, it fits as well within the Competition Appeal Tribunal, that there are certain justices that sit within it, where you do look at their background and think, well, I'm not entirely sure that that's somebody that I'd want sitting on a case of mine. Obviously, again, things have to be done in such a way that you don't end up with somebody trying to play games and going, well, I don't like that one, I don't like that one, I don't like that one. That one happens to be a distant relative, so we'll have that one in. All that sort of nonsense. So, like I say, nothing is ever simple, but in as much as is practically possible in an imperfect world, to try to sort out some of these issues. So as far as I'm concerned, this particular department, office, whatever, and because of the fact that it's always also delinquent, I would abolish this. That would be my recommendation, especially when it comes to later on when we do the Justice Department. We can do all the different reforms of law and all this sort of stuff. I mean, not the entirety of every single law, you know, that will feed into the RASIC stage, but that would be the recommendation in terms of being able to find a proper solution and to cut out an awful lot of this mess, basically. Right, so that's the Competition Appeal Tribunal, and I should stipulate again, we're still working within the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Department of Government. Okay. Next one becomes more complicated, and I had spent a fair bit of time thinking about this one, because I could make several episodes around the energy in general, and it was a bit of a bugger and that to try to stop myself from going too far into this and try and just concentrate on the very specifics that we're talking about in terms of the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, because like I said, I mean this has got so many problems, so many problems that go beyond just this department. So I'm trying to keep things as narrow as I can. So yeah, let's just crack on with this at the moment. Right, so the first thing that I did notice is the obviously that, because I do the checks and that to find out from the latest reports how much is being spent on it in the current year, so that I can add it into the figures, the running total that is going on at the moment. And when I opened up the 2019-2020 report and saw the 6,740,000, first and foremost I thought, well, okay, eyebrow raised, and that takes us a good way through the amount that's outstanding that's got to be levelled out roughly in that, in order for the initial statement for the department to be accurate. But what I did notice, and so within the links I've got the links to both reports, so the 2018-19 and 2019-20, because it showed the previous year's figures at 99.5 billion. Now, because that's as much as I already know that the budget numbers that are presented by government are nothing remotely like the amount of money that would be spent as a total. So, for example, I think for the particular year in question, it was talking about 85 billion as the entire budget of government. So that one alone would have been 14 billion over the entire budget. So essentially what we have to look for there is, if you remember going back to possibly episode 1, it might have been episode 2, I can't remember, where I showed like the bubble chart and that, and it had something like government spending of around about 556 billion, something along those lines. So you end up with the government budget, which has got one figure, but then the actual spending across all of the departments, which is another. So I will be looking towards what kind of disparity there might be in terms of that when I get to the end eventually. But to see that amount of 99.5 billion for the previous year, I thought, well, I can't just skip past that one and just concentrate on this, because then I also had a look at one of the sites for the departments that was giving an explanation around what the department actually does as a whole, just like a brief overview essentially, and where it's, as I've got indicated here, and that it says that the costs are currently around 3 billion annually. Well, clearly they're not. And then the other key statement they make of 2/3 met by government. Well, clearly again with this level of cost at 12%, there's something going very, very wrong there. So what I wanted to do was take a look and see why in the hell was this 99.5 billion the year before. And so that's why I've got the explanation at the top, and it was down to discounting. For people that are not familiar with what discounting is, it's probably, I'm not here to give an accounting lesson. So there's what the calculation is as to what they've done there, how they've come up with that, and the purpose there, and that is to be understanding a little bit more around the future the current and future values. So NPV means net present value. So it's understanding what the costs and that are going to be going forward, because it's a very distinct possibility they're going to have to borrow in order to be able to meet these costs going forward. So that was a number that really stood out to me. But the problem that I got from that was the fact that they'd had this previous target of 3 billion a year, and after performing this particular calculation, the costs have jumped up like that, and the revenues as a percentage. I mean, even if you took that amount of revenue into the 3 billion annual figure, that would still work out at around about 26%. So it's still not meeting target. And if anybody doesn't understand, first and foremost, I suppose I should go back and give a little bit more of an explanation on a bit that I've already skipped past. Because the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, and that is literally about decommissioning nuclear sites. So when it comes down to revenue, you will find that there is the waste that is coming from those sites does hold value. Some of it does include things like uranium as well, spent uranium. There's still value to be held there. So the thing about this is the amount of work, the amount of time, and the amount of consistent taxpayer burden that goes into this, which does raise a whole range of different questions. So moving into the next slide now, because I wanted to look again and that to see about this 3 billion. And so once again, that we can see in their performance targets where they've got an expenditure limit of 3.243 billion. Now, if you look over at the expenditure as I've stated, where I've got the information from the annual report, you can see that the program expenditure comes the closest to that is the 3.351. Obviously, for me, the key figure is the total net expenditure, and that's where I get my 6740 from. But if they've set a limit as to what the expenditure is supposed to be, and they've gone over that just from the programme expenditure alone, it's the disparity that leads to the question. So I can't really say that they're doing all of the things that they're supposed to be doing in a manner that they are supposed to be doing it. So, if that makes sense. So I just wanted to be able to highlight as well that as to where any kind of excuse might come from questioning to this, where they turn around and say, well, oh, the expenditure limit is actually the programme expenditure limit, not the entire expenditure. Either way, silly amounts of money. Absolutely ludicrous amounts of money. And there would be areas that I would be looking into this where the question has to be raised as to, should this fully be a taxpayer burden? Because there are some of these sites in that way you're looking towards a running cost lasting for anything up to around about 100 years. So and I'll touch on that in a little while. So like I say, I'm trying to keep this as focused specifically on this department, which it does need to be. But there are much wider issues around this. But I just want to highlight some of the issues that I'm looking at the moment, and that give you a bit of an idea as to what it is that we're dealing with. So when it comes down to the actual sites that are currently going through decommissioning, these are all the sites, and there's a little map there, and that by the side of me, yeah, there, that shows where they're located around the country. So I've got loads of notes on this and that, but I'm not going to bore you to tears with all of this. I've got all this information to be able to feed in to the programme for myself. So just giving a couple of pieces of information. So you've got Sellafield, which was built and operated has been going since the 1940s, and that was actually the world's first commercial nuclear power station. Operated 47 years, electricity to more than 200,000 homes, and then closed in 2003. So it's also been the site has also been taken forward to operate since 2011-12. The Windscale Advanced Gas-Cooled Reactor. So the first nuclear powered reactor to be decommissioned as well. So had a multi-purpose, that one, but still there's an awful lot still to be done around that site. Right, like I say, I'll carry on, otherwise I'll be going far too far. Flipping over to the other side, and that way the vast majority of them that are run through this Magnox program. If you remember last week or the week before or whatever it was, where I turned around and said how the Magnox had run a program running up to 2019 and ended, quite clearly that is going to have another program set out, because this is very much a long-standing project. Yeah, because it had 2.7 billion during that particular period. It's plainly going to cost an awful lot more than that. So the sites that we've got involved here: Berkeley, constructed in the early 60s, started providing energy from 1962, blah blah blah, ended its operational life in 1989. I mean, we're not talking about huge amounts of time here, really. And I mean, these are there's areas to this and that's it is good for me as well, that to be looking into this sort of stuff, because I thought these plants lasted a hell of a lot longer than that. Anyway, well, that becomes a question that I'll be leading to in a little while. Right, so Bradwell, began producing electricity in 1962, ceased in 2002. Chapel Cross, Scotland's first nuclear station, began construction in 1955, generation began in 1959, and it ceased operations in 2004. So obviously in that, I mean, all of these sites and that, all this decommissioning process and that, this has all been taking place since these sites have ceased producing energy and ceased providing their core purpose. Dungeness A. Right. Connected to the grid in 1965. Essentially came to the end of operations in 2006. It didn't go through to decommissioning until June 2012. Okay. Right, so Harwell. Harwell is one where it's not actually a standard site, because this wasn't for commercial energy. This was for atomic energy research, and that was done from 1946 onwards. So you can imagine some of the stuff that they were building. Okay, Hinkley Point A. Doesn't have the specific date, but I mean, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's had a life of 35 years, stopped in 2000. Hunterston A, another one up in Scotland, opened in 1969, where at the time it was the largest in the world. It was the first reactor raised to a height of over 10 meters. Not entirely sure what that means, but never mind. Right, so it closed in 1989 in terms of useful life to providing electricity generation. Oldbury, just outside of Bristol, commissioned in 1967, closed in 2012. Sizewell A, shut down, began in 1966, shut down 2006. Oh, God almighty, the Welsh language. Traws Learn to use vowels, for Christ's sake. Anyway, began service in 1965, closed in 1993. Not really consistent time frames here, is there? Oh, I've got to put that in there twice, haven't I? I have, I've put it in there twice. Ignore one of them. Right, the next one. Wilfa. Commissioned in 1971. Shut down to December 2015. They reckon that there's going to be another 12.6 billion required. However, they're turning around saying it could take another 100 years. Well, the costs that they're talking about, it plainly is not going to be equal to 12.6 billion then, is it? So these are the kind of problems that you come across when you start digging into some of the details. Right, 9 of the sites have been defueled apparently. 99% of the radioactive hazard has been reduced from the sites. So, yeah. Right, other one's Dounreay, another Scottish one. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that properly either. Ran since the 1950s. This one's in the process of being decommissioned, so it's still actually operating to a small level. Springfields, 1946 that got going. It seems like a bit of an unusual one, the Springfield. I mean, I don't know if Homer Simpson's involved in this one, but there's various building work, and that's still continuing on this particular site, and that's going to take it through to 2023. Slightly unusual. Anyway, Cappenhurst, home to uranium, ceased operation in 1982. I mean, the uranic materials are expected to be stored until 2120. Wow. So yeah. Then you've got things like your low-level waste repository that's been running since 1959. Blah blah. And that's looking towards going through till 2050. So, like I say, that's a bit of a skip through in that, in some minor details. So that we've got a better understanding as to what it is that we're dealing with, and obviously in that, if you get rid of one of those Welsh ones, which I've doubled up for some reason, it gives you a bit of an idea as to the lifetime of these sites. But what's important here is not so much the lifetime of each site, it's the life cycle of the site. And this is one of the areas where I've always had a problem with things like wind farms or solar panels and things like that, in so much as trying to get these people to understand what is the life cycle cost. I think there are issues in terms of life cycle cost, and move into this next part, and what other people have done work on that, where they're calling it a levelized cost. And I don't like it when people start mixing terminology. But you've got the advanced nuclear there. So obviously advanced nuclear is not going to be the exact same scenario that we've been talking about with these sites that are going through decommissioning. But for them to be having this position in comparison to other forms of energy, I think it really does ask the question, you know, are you sure about that? Is this genuinely, is this supposed levelized cost the lifetime, the useful lifetime, or is it full life cycle cost? This is where I think a plan really does need to be put into place, and that where we're getting everything together in terms of all the different energy sources and saying, well, okay, what genuinely are the costs of all of this, and what are the practicalities in terms of ownership and operation, because you're going to be limited in terms of the numbers of private organisations, at least off the bat anyway, that would be able to handle what would essentially be not only the upfront costs, but most certainly this very extensive back-end cost, which is all being passed down to the taxpayer. So because the energy bills are causing a real problem, and they're going to continue to cause a problem, because like I said, when we've got this situation where they're even if we did say, right, we need to be able to have some more nuclear facilities, because there's more that are going to be coming online for decommissioning soon, and this is something that I pointed out to the National Grid something like about 4 or 5 years ago, and said, well, you've got sites that are due for decommissioning. So when you end up removing that from the energy mix, how exactly are you going to be making up the difference? I mean, if somebody's out there, and that, I mean, because obviously in that Boris the Appeaser, and that is doing all of his green bullshit at the moment, and that is part of his Great Reset garbage, where again it's all based on the fairy farts and the sunbeams out of Greta's arse. It doesn't equate to the amount of capacity that you're going to be losing from the nuclear sites. So I think it was, I can't remember precisely what the resource was, but somebody once again has come out with a warning over the past week, I think it was, and I'm pretty sure it was a warning that came from the National Grid, to say that we're looking towards having quite large-scale blackouts moving into the fairly near-term future. And these are all things that I was pointing out 4 or 5 years ago. That when they started saying, well, okay, everything's fine, and that everybody's going to have electric vehicles, everybody's going to be charging their cars, and everything's going to be electric. All this gas boilers that you've got now, that's all going to be electric. Everything's absolutely fine. We've got plenty of capacity. And at that time, I said, you haven't. You just bloody well haven't. So what the hell are you thinking in terms of, first and foremost, putting out this absolutely horrendous propaganda and guff, where literally in 2015 and that you were saying again, look forward to blackouts, and then like about half a year later saying, oh, there's no problem, and now once again we're looking towards this scenario of we could have blackouts. Well, you will have blackouts, because even if we did start to put things together around the nuclear sector again, the build time, I mean, you're probably going to be looking towards a gap in energy requirements of something anywhere between 5 and 10 years. Plus, with the factors as well, and that the types of lunatic contracts that the government had actually been looking forward, or had been looking to negotiate, but I think they've backed away from now, that with the Chinese, which you don't want to do. So having that domestic capacity, who actually really should own this? I mean, to me, it seems like the only way that things are going to be able to operate on that kind of level, where it does maintain a domestic ownership model, is to have that cost burden to the taxpayer initially, but then if there could be some form of, I don't know, like whether that would be, I mean, it's a bugger, you see, in that, because you end up with these scenarios where I don't want to go into some sort of socialist scenario, and I don't want to go into this Great Reset stakeholder bullshit. But in terms of large-scale energy, I'm not entirely sure that there's much of a way around it. So because you won't have enough for an independent private organisation to handle all this cost, I don't think, not without consumer bills being absolutely horrendous. But if the shareholding, not stakeholding, shareholding, because of the investments has actually come from the taxpayer, then the shareholding is with the taxpayer. But then you've got to be absolutely bloody certain that the person that is sat at the top of this knows what the hell they're doing, and do not let any sort of government bod go in there to do any operating on it and that, because I mean, I guarantee within 2 weeks it'll bloody fail and blow up or something. So when it comes down to the private side, it wouldn't end up being altogether that much different to the current system, in terms of you probably end up having a private sector operator going in there, but doing it on a service-based contract. So any bill that the consumer has doesn't end up being something from one of these from an energy company, and that it literally is from that particular site that everybody would own a share in. Like I said, I'm just spitballing here, by the way. Would that end up having a positive effect to the energy bills? I don't know. These are the areas that have got to be looked at and really considered carefully, because, like I say, when you've got this level of cost going on for that length of time, and like I say, when they've turned around and done that discounting, and you just suddenly get another 99.5 billion smacked in out of the middle of nowhere. it just smacks to me like something seriously has to be done to look at the energy sector, because I think they've made life so complicated for themselves, and they've intentionally avoided the proper language in terms of what is a lifetime cost, not bloody levelized and oh it's just in this particular period of time, the entire period, because otherwise you're not going to know what your margins are, you're not going to know what the price is supposed to be. And yeah, all this stuff around about with the revenue streams and that for the secondary life cycle, things of this nature. It is something that definitely needs an awful lot of proper, genuine investigation by competent people for once. That really is the key point. People that have not got, probably it's going to be people that have got skin in the game, but not necessarily ones that are ideologically forced to one particular direction or another. And let's really figure out what the hell it is that we're going to do with this, because this model of having operators and service providers and all this sort of stuff from various different nations, and the muddle that they've made in terms of the link into the European Union as well, it is a mess. So this particular department, obviously I can't turn around and say, well, no, we're going to forget about that and we're just going to shut it down. That can't happen, because we're talking about nuclear waste. But what we do need to do is have a really grown-up conversation around energy, the sites, the types of energy, and yeah, just get some actual common sense going in there for once, because there is this increasing problem of energy poverty that has all got to be dealt with, and the ideologically driven push towards idiotic, mathematically challenged wind and solar. I mean, it doesn't make sense, but anyway, I thought I'd just try and touch on it to the degree that I have, with just these few bits of information about the sites, the issues around the annual costs, and then what we need to be looking at in terms of what does all of this, what do all of these indicators, what do these essentially benchmark figures, which is probably the best way to look at it. I mean, we've got proper benchmark figures here and that we can utilise to be able to add into a proper lifetime cost projection model. Yeah, obviously advanced nuclear and that, it's not going to be quite so severe as these ones, but the investigation is required one way or the other. So, bit of a long-winded one for that particular department, but it gives you an idea as the types of conversations that are going to be required in order to be able to put things right there. So, the third and final one for the Sisyphus complex solution part of this is the Small Business Commissioner. Not an exceptionally heavy cost, 756,742. However, right, so we've got the strategy there, all of which I'm not entirely sure amounts to a hill of beans, because all of this is non-binding assistance to SMEs, which essentially means that you can have some government bod that will turn up to a large corporation and say, well, okay, well, you've got this contract with a small medium enterprise, an SME, and there's an issue in terms of paying invoices on time, something along those lines. And it's, I suppose, a small part of a intimidation factor mixed in with what they claim to be some advice in terms of how you actually go about having contracts with larger corporations. can't say as I've ever heard that being put into action. I don't care what sort of examples they put up. Basic problems here, though, is that if you remember when I spoke about the space agency and the supply chain readiness levels, and I suggested that Rolls-Royce were particularly good at it. Now, when it comes down to very large organisations such as Rolls-Royce, or if you go into the automotive sector, for example, you've got your likes of Jaguar Land Rover, Ford. They tend to be the, well, I mean, your Nissans and what have you. Nissan doesn't tend to be quite so bad. Smaller vehicle makers like McLaren don't tend to have this problem. What I'd explained previously is that because you have the life cycle of the vehicle that's going to be sold, and so they have to have processes in place to make sure that you can meet the quality and the extent of supply for a given period of time. That ends up putting an awful lot of strain onto a small, medium-sized enterprise. Generally speaking, you are looking towards the mid-sized enterprise that's able to go into these types of contracts, because primarily, let's say when it comes down to JLR and that, you have to have a £3 million in revenue in order to be able to meet the criteria. So you're not going to get a small business going in there. It's not impossible, but considerably less likely. Now, in terms of being able to meet that kind of criteria, that's one thing. All of those areas and that should be understood. Now, when you're looking at the purchase agreements and the processes in order to enter into the supply chain, the terms and conditions that they tend to put out are onerous, to say the least, and more often than not laden with conditions that are just impractical. And because of the size of the organisations, they generally tend to be very inflexible with that. So there are parts around that where some kind of contractual oversight is potentially a worthy advisory, but I wouldn't put it in terms of this particular department, where I can say straight away in that, because this is non-binding anyway. I think this department is a total waste of time, so I'll just get rid of it. Being sure that larger organisations are not able to basically take the piss and put too much liability and too much stress and strain onto the suppliers is one area of oversight that could be looked at. The other part is predominantly, and this is the one that makes up the vast majority of issues, is around the payment schedules, where quite often you will be left with a scenario whereby the contract will be payment once every 3 months, so a quarterly payment. The smaller the business you are, that 3-month period of being able to pay the bills, once you've actually got into the swing of things and that, you can kind of plan around it a little bit. But being able to get to that point is the difficult part. So I think it is a case of having conversations with the large suppliers. So look, you need to be a little bit more practical here, and that, because I mean, if the supplier is providing you with something that you actually want, to the extent that you would actually enter a contract with them, then you're going to have to grow up a little bit and be a bit fairer. It does tend to be one of these scenarios whereby, because they have a process set out that goes through to the purchasing department, and you'll have your purchasing people sitting there go, computer said no, we can't do that, no, rather than just sort of growing a brain and go, right, okay, this is the scenario. If I need to get the right sign off, to get the right signature from the right person, so on and so forth, make sure that kind of process is in place. Then say, well, look, the reason why we're going to deal with these people is because they've got something that we need. Therefore, in order for them to be able to operate, to a given point, and that, I mean, you can look towards having the planning in the process to make sure that once they've got to a certain point, then you can move into the more standard phase of procurement process. Getting these people to understand this kind of scenario would be wiser, because if we look at, because obviously this doesn't apply to every single large organisation, but where you do find you've got the biggest problem with these is with the ones that are essentially exactly who you'd imagine, the bloody World Economic Forum wankers. That lot, especially now where they're in this mode of we will destroy all other competition, this is a serious problem that needs to be handled, and you're not going to get it handled through a little pissant organisation like this. This is something that would need to be done on a much wider, much forceful scenario. And when it comes down to these areas, and when you're having somebody that's got some oversight, the worst thing that you can do is have any kind of advice or advisory body set up that immediately has non-binding written in there, because that means you're basically going up there and you're essentially jaws with dentures where you've just forgotten your teeth. I mean, it literally is, I will come up and gum you to death. Not a particularly frightening prospect. If there's going to be an oversight body, if there is going to be something that is going to be able to hold people to account, it has got to be something with teeth. Now, whether that comes in the form of fines, enforcement of some description, who knows? That's the part that needs to be looked into in terms of being able to provide a detailed solution. But part of the solution is making sure that it's something there that has got the teeth, something that is going to give the incentive to do as you're bloody told. So, like I say, the reliance on the smaller businesses and more likely in that the medium-sized companies, the innovation that comes through those organisations is plainly obvious in that it plays a very big role in the larger organisations being able to swagger around like they think they own the world. They don't. The innovation is coming from the smaller companies. So those SMEs do need something within the legal system that's going to say, right, okay, you are obliged to do something for these people that works correctly, in terms of if they are supplying you with A, then the moment that it has been delivered, in some circumstances, there would be an upfront cost required as well. So if you're developing something new, you know that it's reached a certain level of feasibility already, but they're prepared to say, well, okay, this is something that we definitely need you to be able to produce. Rather than going through the programs and that way the taxpayer pays for it, they say, right, I need an upfront cost, half of the cost, and then I will deliver it to you on a given date. Make sure you bloody do deliver it properly on that given date, and then you'll get the rest upon receipt. You know, standard types of contract scenarios that happen all the time, especially in international trade. So looking towards these more standard areas rather than this position of me big man and I'll make all the rules and I'll tell you when and if I'm going to pay you, and these SMEs sort of sitting around panting waiting for them to have a bone thrown to them. Putting an end to that kind of scenario. I understand what the purpose is supposed to be. I don't think this is the department to be able to do it, and therefore I think this department becomes redundant. Okay, so we move into the overview as we stand right now. Obviously this is going to start becoming more and more difficult to be able to read. Doesn't really matter that much, it's just showing you the work that I'm doing, and that in terms of the breakdowns, you know, where all the costs lay. Yeah, well, obviously I have more information that I don't necessarily need to go into here, but in terms of the target budget that we're looking at the moment, so we're up to nearly 7.5 billion at the moment, and so we're looking for another just shy of 3 billion, another 3 billion more, and then we'll look towards possibly matching up. Because of the large number of offices that are still to come, I think that number is going to be a problem. But we'll see. We'll go through. This is the stage that we're at the moment. With the policies, I've done a little bit of a shift around here, and that's so that the longer ones can be stated accordingly. So in terms of the abolishing, you can see wherever it is. Hang on a minute. Can I get my mouse to? Yeah, you can see my mouse. So yeah, the abolish here, and that you've got the what were they called? Something service. No, not that page. Not that page. Oh bollocks! I can't remember what page it was on. Why is that not at the right? Why in the hell would that not be right? I've lost a page already. You bastard. Or did I put it to the back here for some reason? I bloody well did, like a moron. The competition service. How embarrassing's that, eh? So anyway, the competition service. I wasn't going to just leave it, and I'm not going to... Anyway, whatever. Competition service. And then also the small business commissioner. Shit a brick. That's gone. Then we have the Review, Reform, Develop Real Energy Programme with no BS artists. I thought that would make that one much more simplistic. Right, now I can put that page over there. It's a hard life, this, you know. It's not as if it's the only thing that I do. So anyway. So yeah, this is where we stand in terms of policies at the moment, where I can keep everything just on this one page. Obviously, once again, there is a separate spreadsheet made up that does have all of the policies in the kind of detail you would expect it to be in, and also inserts at the appropriate place within the RASIC, so on and so forth. So that's where we stand at the moment within the Sisyphus complex solution. There'll be more departments to be investigated next time, which then lets me go into this.
Fuck off! EFB you are, you cheeky fucking twat!
Right, there's a few parts to this one this week. Okay, so let's start off with the United Nations and the United Nations Development Programme, and pointing to the guy at the top of that, this Achim Steiner, who is, as you can tell from the picture above, being pointed at there, and that he is one of the boys from Brazil. So there's a few things about this and that in terms of his that makes me basically call him a boy from Brazil. His early life and education. So the part of Brazil where he's brought up, the Rio Grande do Sul, whatever. That is a particular part of Brazil where, although the data is it included in it? Yeah, there is a bit at the bottom there. It says the Nazism in Brazil. Notice it only really goes up to 1938 as far as this is concerned, but it does give the indication that particular areas in Brazil were rather well known for having basically Nazis right from the early days, and then it obviously continued after the war as well, which when you look at the link in the description, you'll find that it only goes up to 1938, which is a little bit telling, as if none of them went there afterwards at all. Yeah, right. So in terms of this particular fella and that, I mean, it suggests that his father was just, this innocent farmer that went out there and resettled because, it was an area of Brazil that was friendly to the Germans. But, how many how many Brazilian farmers can you think of that have then had their lad sent to all of these universities and then going to Oxford and all this sort of stuff and that, and going from there directly into the types of organisations that frankly form a very good part of being able to enable the Red House report. I can't think of that many Brazilian farmers that can afford to have their kids go around to do all that stuff before ending up in these types of organisations. So just kind of suggesting, because I mean, if you look around a little bit for yourself and that, you will find out that that particular area of Brazil is quite well known for being able to find certain exceptionally expensive artworks that used to belong to Jewish people that have suddenly appeared in these locations in Brazil. So Klaus Schwab didn't get all of the money, obviously. So the background, it is proper Boys from Brazil stuff. Now, when you go into his first proper role as such, and like I say, I mean, again, who the hell falls into these kinds of positions if there's not some relationships? The International Union for Conservation of Nature. What a scummy organisation this is, and that's why I've gone and put in the one bit about the criticisms. Now, when it comes down to the criticisms, the one in particular that sticks in the craw for me, and that is, I think I mentioned it previously, around the World Wildlife Fund that has a relationship with our very own Prince Philip and Prince Charles, and also the Royal Dutch family, for which there's going to be a few little relationships around that I'll be dealing with to a small degree as we're going through. And that's in terms of the fact that as much as there's considerably more, I think there was something like around about 16 different tribes around Africa where they've suddenly turned around and said, well, we want to have these conservation areas in Africa, which basically means they just want to get rid of the people. And then they want to turn up and that and have their hooray Henry and that and the shooting parties, and then steal the land and that to get any mineral rights that they can pinch from it as well, because they sure as hell don't look after the land. They turn around and give the excuse of saying, well, we need these people to leave because they're the ones that are destroying the land, and yet it's actually these people that do that. So their treatment of the Maasai is highlighted in this particular part of things. And when they've been undertaking that particular type of task, not only is the relationship with the British royal family and the Dutch royal family, then there is another link there, and that which is to the types of entities that support them, and one of them is Royal Dutch Shell. Shouldn't come as a surprise there, especially because they're rather vocal on certain things, but I'll come to that a little bit more. So the types of policies that these people were undertaking, it's very much, I mean, it has actually been pointed out that they are not entirely dissimilar to eugenics freaks. So, the links continue really. And that Boys from Brazil, you got your farmer thing, and that you're suddenly ending up in all these organisations. Then that are pushing this part of this Red House report type of scenario, and then happen to be eugenics freaks, and that they want to get rid of all of those horrible black people out of Africa. And you just sort of think, well, I know who you are, mate, and no thank you, basically. It's just, I suppose the one part of it that really gives a bit of a a warning signal, really, in terms of where future problems are going to come about, is the fact that within the United Nations, when you've got these types of socialists, of which they are all socialists, and then you end up with the communists as well that are trying to do their bit, there's going to be a battle there at some point, because they're not very well known for getting on. These are ideologies that are not generally very compatible. So there's going to be a problem that will come out at some point. So whether they've turned around and said, oh, well, you know, we're going to have this agreement and that's be able to, you have this part of the world and I will have the other. I don't know. But there's going to be a problem. It's going to go bang at some point. But the key thing really for me, and that is because of the UK, we put in 172 million into this UNDP piece of shit. So for me, get the UK out, save ourselves on that amount of money. Yeah, there's the at the top there, and there's the information that says that, you know, the second largest contributor is the United Kingdom. So yeah, we need to get out of this, because this is not doing it. It doesn't matter which organisation it is, whether it's UNDP or whether it was this bloody IUCN or whatever. They're all basically one and the same thing, and none of them have got any good intentions. They're all just eugenics freaks. They want to get rid of people. They want the little master race, and nobody should be giving them the time of day, let alone any bloody money. But there is another part that I want to touch on here, in terms of what I'm doing by identifying these individuals before I do go into the breakdown of what all of these different organisations actually do, in the same way that I do with the Sisyphus complex solution. And that is to give a little bit of a highlight to something that I literally only come across today, which is why I've kind of put it in this particular area, where there was a video from the New Culture Forum with this Dr. Radomir Tilecoat, I think, and he's actually doing something not entirely dissimilar. He's produced a report. That's the front cover of the report there. Again, links are going to be in the description. But where he's concentrating on the Chinese influence, and so again, when I showed the first slide about the Daily Mail, that we're looking into various parts of the government contracts with crony mates and all this sort of stuff. This is also another good indication that other people are looking into the same kind of areas that I'm suggesting as well. Where obviously the difference here, and that is that he wants to concentrate on the influence from China. He is a little bit light in a couple of areas, in so much that he states that, I think he states that there is 15 bollocks, here we are. Yeah, 15 organisations within, or 15 tentacles within the United Nations, of which they're not. There's about 54. I think he's essentially looking at one particular. So, for example, like with the World Bank, there are several different tentacles underneath that. Whereas I count them as individual. I think he's counting that as one group. That's where there could be a little bit of the variation. And he's pinpointed to 4 of the offices that are currently held by people that are members of the Chinese Communist Party, all of which are people I think I've already identified through the programs that I'm doing. Like I say, it's good that somebody is looking into this type of issue. It's good that there's more information out there. It's getting this kind of attention. I do kind of prefer my own method in terms of the wider scenario and showing not just the communists but the socialists and the boys from Brazil and all this sort of stuff, because it does show that. I mean, he also talks about the WHO and that Tedros fella, because of the influence that Chinese have had on him. But I think we need to have something where we are getting a wider understanding as to who the people are across the board, because if we look at the entirety of the United Nations and go, okay, we've got a problem with the influence from China, you're picking at one particular scab, and you're missing the massive gaping wound that's by the side of it, because there's far more socialists and bizarre crony ideologues and all this sort of stuff and that are far more involved than there are communists at the moment. So collectively they're a problem, which is why I say get out of the United Nations and all of its tentacles. But if we've got somebody that is providing some information that it might mean that we end up getting part way there a little bit quicker, that's fine, as long as there is some sort of progress towards this. I haven't got a problem. But I thought I'd highlight this so you can see that other people are starting to do similar work. Right, so let's move into Shell, seeing as I had mentioned them. Now, the thing about Shell, Jesus Christ, the amount of things that I could say, I think it's it's easy enough to turn around, because I think it's obviously going to stand out the middle part there, and that with the connections to the Nazis. There is one particular fella by the name of John Donovan, where it occurred to me to think, well, I know there's going to be that much stuff that I could put in about Shell, and I'm sure I could make either an entire episode based on it, or make a film. Well, I don't need to, because John Donovan's done it. Again, links are in the description. There's websites that are dedicated to this, and he has made a film that is based off of the website's data. But yeah, the connections between Shell and the Nazi Party are absolutely staggering. Very big supporters. One part where I think he does make a minor error is in relationship to the what he says is the founder of Shell. I haven't written down the name, it doesn't really matter. He's dead anyway, so I think he died in 1939. But he's got this fellow listed as the founder of Shell. He's not the founder, he was just the CEO. So, and there are little bits of information that do make you think, well, there's more than enough in there that is evidenced and you can take to be as fact. There's always going to be the little snippets and that we think, well, okay, there's a little bit more detail required there, and that's something that I'm going to be going into in a little bit more detail in a moment as well. But when you have these types of situations, I'm sure you'll get people that tell us, well, okay, that was a particular situation that Shell was in back then. Well, let's think about how things have progressed since then, and that brings us to the human rights one at the top of the areas where they were in Nigeria. I mean, pay a particular attention to the part at the bottom and that within the red boxes where it says Shell agreed to pay $15.5 million in a legal settlement. $15.5 million. $15.5 million for summary execution, torture, inhumane treatment, arbitrary arrests, detentions, hangings. I mean, for fuck's sake. I mean, nobody prosecuted. No Shell executives are put in prison, and they could go into Nigeria and literally conduct these kinds of atrocities. And apparently, in that, if you just pay over a bit of money, that's okay. I mean, this is the World Economic Forum. These are the types of people that are turning around and telling you that they should rule the world. I mean, for Christ's sake, if it's not an indication as to how little of a shit they give for anybody, I don't know what is. I mean, Jesus Christ. I think I'd actually like to put something like all of this kind of information together at a certain point in time, because as I'm going forward with a member basis, I will be able to show a whole range of different, very similar scenarios to this from a range of the different organisations that are members of the World Economic Forum, and use it as an evidence base to say, well, okay, seeing as this is setting the precedent, and so because that precedent has been set, we the people are then able to do something similar. and we might be able to go along to some of these organisations or these appeasing politicians and suddenly decide that, oh, who knows, if they're taken outside and they suddenly spontaneously appear dangling from a lamppost, you go, oh well, never mind, here you go, here's 15 quid. Can we do that? I wonder. So I mean, this is all stuff in 1990. This was from 1996. So we're not talking about too long ago. And then the other piece, the photograph underneath the World Economic Forum sign there. Now that looks like it's a really old photograph, doesn't it? Well, it is. It is an old photograph. Problem with it though is that this is in relation to a story from January 2015, where the All Seas Shipping Group is owned by a fella by the name of Edward Hirima, and problem with that is his dad is Peter Schelt, who's the Nazi officer that you can see in that picture. And this idiot decided that he had this huge, great vessel for oil transportation. I think at the time it was one of the largest ones in the world, and he named it after his father. And Shell were the first ones to put their hands up and go, oh, yeah, we'll use that. We want that. Yeah, can you come over and you help ship our oil around and that? Needless to say, that caused a bit of a problem in terms of the Jewish community. Going, you've called it what? And saying to Shell, you want to do a contract with who? It was a bit of a problem. I mean, is the guy's son responsible for the acts of his father? No. But for him to name the ship after his father, after what his father had done, that's, I mean, because I mean, he was in the Waffen SS, this guy. So I mean, they learn nothing, and they'll just literally just fly this shit in front of people's faces, and they don't care. But then they wonder why people turn and say, "Hold on a minute." But again, you know, whatever gets done about these things, bugger all. Now, there's a whole bunch of stuff that fly in the face of the, you get all the green idiocy, where you'll get the green activist lunatics and that screaming about the oil industry, and they will scream and shout about Shell. There's been the fights between Shell and the likes of Greenpeace and whatever and that, which have all been completely false, because Shell have been putting money into these organisations for donkeys. So it is basically kind of like this false fight that they're having. So when you look towards any sort of research, so what has Shell actually done in the past that could be considered to be an issue, you will find that you'll get, I mean, even like from the Wikipedia entry, and that's, oh, well, Shell polluted this and that, and they had an oil spill here and an oil spill there. I've not put all that sort of stuff in there, and that because, quite frankly, you know, bollocks. I'm not interested in doing a climatard scream and shout nonsense. I'm not interested in doing the environmental shit either. I'm interested in the company itself and the people that run the company. In terms of the oil sector has value. These people probably not, but the oil sector does. I've had several arguments with Shell when I was previously on LinkedIn, that because I used to ask the appropriate questions to that the CEO, that Ben van Beurden, all of which he would never be able to answer. I've had a couple of occasions where some of his lackeys have tried to have a go back at me, and that, which never really lasted too long. And then suddenly my comments would disappear as if by magic. because they could never answer a damn thing. They'll always try to run and hide from this stuff. But the key point to this and that is to pinpoint exactly who it is that these people are. But there is another area of this that I wanted to go into, in terms of when you're doing research of this kind, one of the sources that, generally speaking, that you're going to look at to a certain amount, and that is going to be the likes of Wikipedia. Now they've only touched on minor areas of the atrocities in particular that can be apportioned to the likes of Shell. But one of them that they did put in there, you can see down the bottom, that is this the Jebel Akhdar War, basically the Oman War. And this had relevance to Shell because the war that took place did indeed have some relevance to military assistance in return for oil, essentially, or supply, at least. And the company in question that was benefiting from that was indeed the Iraq Petroleum Company. Now, the way that Wikipedia writes this is highly questionable. So could you turn around and say, well, Shell, having benefited from this particular war in this particular region at that particular point in time, are they responsible for the war in that particular area? Well, no, not really. I mean, I'm more than happy to apportion blame to them where it's due, but I will also question parts where I think somebody's trying to pull a fast one. Because there's two parts in the way that they present this that I hold into question. I mean, I'd put it up in here to begin with and that, and I started thinking about it. Something just didn't ring quite right. So they've got down the Iraq Petroleum Company, and the shareholders there being Shell, Total, ExxonMobil, BP. And they've also turned and stipulated that this was a de facto British colony. And I thought, well, I don't remember Oman being a part of the colonies. I mean, I'm not a great historian or anything like that, but something kept on nagging at me. And I thought, right, let's have a little bit of a look at that and see what's going on there. So I haven't gone into any massive detail, just enough for me to be able to go, right, when I'm talking to you, when we're looking at these sorts of things, we have to make sure that we can look at things and that go, do these things actually make sense? So, right, Shell, World Economic Forum, bastards? Yes. Should anybody paying attention to them? No. Should you be paying attention to their Great Reset bullshit? No. They've got no good intentions towards anybody. That's that bit done. Now, in terms of this and what Wikipedia, which is probably going to be, as per usual, somebody has written some bollocks in there. So I thought, let's have a bit of a look. Right, so the Iraq Petroleum Company archive. And it is in the BP archive, which is held at the University of Warwick. Thing is, it gives the list of the shareholders. And yes, Shell was a part of the shareholders, but the likes of ExxonMobil, not even BP, I don't think. No. So the shareholders at the particular point in time of history that these people are talking about doesn't match. So somebody putting an entry into Wikipedia is telling porky pies. Now, another part to this. If we look at the some of the details around the various countries that made up the British Empire, there is actually an entry for Oman. However, as I've highlighted in red there, they're not a formal colony or protectorate. And if anybody wants to sort of either, again, there's a link in the description, or just press pause and read through this bit now. The key part that you have to remember in terms of Oman at that particular point in time, you are also looking at a point in time when the Ottoman Empire was being pushed back. And so the regions themselves, and that if we've had a friendly relationship with, I don't know what you call them, like the Sultan of Oman or whatever the bloody hell you call them, if you've got a friendly relationship with them and that in terms of the transportation, and then also, yes, to a degree in that it would have started having the relationships around the oil. But if you've got that relationship with somebody and that they're turning around and saying, okay, we've got an issue where the Saudis and so forth and that and all these other people and that are now having this infighting because the Ottoman Empire is in retreat, you're going to go in and you're going to help your friend, or, well, if you want to call it that, the person that you've been dealing with in a particular area where you've got at least some sort of friendly relationship. If they're finding that they have a problem, then if requested, which it was, to go in and provide some assistance, does it require the amount of assistance that was given in terms of, you know, the air cover and so forth? Some of that can be called into debate, but the point of it is that it's not as simple as what was put forward by Wikipedia. They presented that in a very, very false interpretation. The wrong companies in terms of the then subsequent relationship in terms of the distribution of oil afterwards, because that was one of the benefits. That was part of the agreement. So yes, we can come in and we can give you some help, but if we're going to do that, can we get something for it? Which means you get your oil supply. There's the company that can do it. We can ship it out through our usual routes. That to me doesn't sound particularly dubious, and that's not really what you'd call going in and colonising somebody. That would be doing a deal with somebody. Somebody being attacked, you help them to tell the ones that are doing the attacking to bugger off. So, like I say, in lots of areas, in terms of being a historian and things like that, I mean, I do think that areas of history are incredibly important. That's why I like people like David Starkey, and I don't give a damn what anybody's been screaming and shouting about him these days because they didn't like one thing that he said. I don't care. He's still a brilliant historian. That's where things like this become quite important, and it becomes a little bit incumbent on me and everybody else that when we are presenting information like this, we do our best to be accurate. And when it comes down to accuracy, not everything that goes on Wikipedia is a lie, but a bloody lot is. So it's a little bit of advice in that to be, have that bit of caution when it comes down to the sources that you use when putting this kind of stuff together. At least be open-minded enough and that to try and find out a little bit more information. I mean, could there be some faults with this information as well? Potentially. But it's enough to be able to call that entry in Wikipedia into question, and certainly the ownership of the Iraq Petroleum Company. I have had a little bit of sort of second-hand involvement in similar areas previously with the oh god, which oil company was it? Can't remember. It was one of the ones in Kuwait. But anyway, I mean, there was an oil company out of Kuwait, and that where the ownership was between the Japanese and the Americans, but working together with the Kuwaitis as well. And it's not always something that is set up where it ends up being like the Syria type of scenario, and that way they've turned around and said, okay, we want an oil pipe to go through here, and if you don't allow it, we're going to cause a fake war or something like that. It's not always that. If there are areas around that, especially when it comes down to implicating your own country's past, you know, facts are facts. We might not like them sometimes, but we have to get them out there as best we can anyway, until proven different. But the Wikipedia stuff just wasn't right. It didn't ring true, but a little bit more of a look might require me looking a little bit more. But either way, it still doesn't take away from the fact that Shell wankers. Anyway, I think that will probably be enough. I don't know how long I've been talking for, but like I say, it is what it is in terms of what I'm trying to present each time. Hopefully there ends up being little bits and pieces to glean information from. If you can find something of use, if you think, well, there's certain areas that you can look into and that you think you can do a better job, that you either want to be able to produce something yourself and say, well, okay, I've actually looked into this and I'm going to produce a video, or I'm going to produce a document and publish it. You know, send it to me, let me have a look. I can correct anything that I've got wrong. If there are any solutions around the Sisyphus complex solution itself, the process that I'm doing there, again, it's all open to people's input. Oh, it's knackering this, isn't it? It's easier watching it than it is doing it, you know. But anyway. I might have a little bit of consumer advice as well next week, so there's always a few bits and pieces that I'm getting involved with. So, and I'm also thinking about developing some other stuff and that to go alongside this, and that whereby if there might be, whether it's like a chainmail circular of something of that description, that where we can get more people involved, where they don't necessarily have to watch every single video. If I can try to put, say for example, like with the notes that I have, all this sort of stuff, put it together into a single document, whether that's done on a weekly basis like this, or you know, whenever I can get the time to do it effectively, and start getting wider awareness in that way. That's something that I'm thinking about as well. So anybody got any feedback and any ideas on that, more than happy. And though it's just a possible at the moment, very early stage conversation, that there could be some videos coming forward where I end up having conversations with people. Don't know at the moment, we shall see. But again, if there are people of interest that are relevant to the types of subjects that I'm putting forward, if I can technically do it, I'm more than happy to give it a go. I say it's not all about my opinion. So yeah, we see if this can evolve into a few other areas, and maybe get a bit more involvement from other people as well. Okay, so standard ending, Moirai directory, and yeah, now I've got to think about a title. Oh, I'll also be making another short video, whether I'll be doing it tonight or not, I'm not sure. That'll be kind of like the intro explainer. I think you can have a single video now that just gives a brief overview of what the channel is. So rather than being an episode, it'll be just like a little intro thing that appears when you go to the main page. So if you see that, if you want to have a look at it, that's fine, but it won't really give you anything more in terms of details as to where we are at this stage. So gradually start to develop things up a little bit, and hopefully become of use. Okay, right, all feedback as usual, more than welcome, and have a good week in the madhouse that has become the world at the moment. All right, cheers, take care, bye bye.